think people's emotions were not in a way were directed in a certain direction based on their hopes and optimism.
Totally. Everyone likes to stick their head in the sand. Makes life much easier and much nicer, and then the reality of things hits you. Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross. We have a blast from 2 weeks ago. We have Travis Brodbeck with me, who does all the wonderful data analysis at the New York Times Siena College poll. He's at Siena College. So it is after the election, and we're here to talk about all of the results. So Travis, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
I'm drinking tea because, as we were just discussing, I'm a little bit hungover from trying to drink away the results with red wine, and it did not work. So I don't know if you have a beverage. Are you drinking anything today?
I am drinking my homemade energy drink. So I get the little powders from one of your favorite retail stores. And because I was up until 2, 3 in the morning, just counting down the results. So I'm also a little tired.
Yeah. So I think a little tired now, a little tired for the next 4 years. It's going to be a little tired. So let's talk about it. Donald Trump is elected to be president. The Senate swung to the GOP, and it appears the House will likely do the same, although it hasn't been called yet. What are the numbers showing?
Absolutely. So as of right now, as we speak, Kamala Harris has 226 electoral votes, and Donald Trump has 292, with Alaska, Arizona, and Nevada still on the table. And it's going to come down to the last couple of counted votes, and definitely Nevada. That one looks pretty close, especially when you think about the other races there. When we look at the Senate, we have 44 seats for the Democrats, 52 for the Republicans, with a few races outstanding. And then for the House, we have 183 Democrats and 200 for the Republicans. 218 is the magic number for the House there. So, in a high-level overview, I just want to kind of frame what I see of the outcomes here. If we do have the GOP take control of all three branches, I would say that wasn't necessarily surprising when you look at the polling. And I also want to frame this that some people, what I've seen some online comments say landslide, and I would say this is not a landslide. I would say this was a decisive victory, but not a landslide. So I want to just call back a couple of landslides just to kind of frame our perspective. If you think about President Hoover, right before the Great Depression, over 400 electoral votes. If you look at Roosevelt, over 400. If you look at, we'll go a little bit more in the future, LBJ, Reagan, Bush Sr., all in the 400 electoral votes. So Donald Trump just hitting over 300 means that, sure, he won the right kind of formula for the map, but I wouldn't say that all of America has decided Donald Trump or not has decided for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think at the moment, with 3 states still coming in, like 72 million votes for Trump, and I think 67 million for Harris. Yep. So no matter what, 67 million people still were in favor of Harris. So for people that feel very discouraged, remember that if you're in a room, one of the people, if you have 2 people in front of you, are likely aligned with your values and beliefs. But ultimately, although Alaska, Nevada, and Arizona have a comment, and they're almost all going to be red.
That's so far what we see right now.
What we're seeing. Okay. So let's talk about some of the demographics, because I think that was really interesting. Also, Harris did not win any swing state.
Yes. The senators in the swing states have performed pretty well in some of the states. So you definitely saw some split ticket voting.
Right, which you had mentioned when we talked previously. And before we could dive into kind of like the outcome of the demographics, I also think really interesting, what you talked about split ticket voting, is that 7 out of the 10 abortion protections on ballots, on like state ballots, passed in very conservative states as well. So I think that's been my silver lining personally, is seeing that, in like Missouri, where I went to school, that protections for women's health are now in their state constitution. Even though those states voted for someone who helped overturn Roe, I think a lot of people, abortion did bring people to the ballot, but on a state level rather than on a federal level.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of these demographics. What are we seeing about who voted?
I will say that, some of the data is still coming in, so a lot of this could change when this is actually published or when we're looking at it. But I want to first kind of start with the main argument that folks made was the women vote. The idea that women would turn out. In the last couple of weeks, we heard in the media circles that, and you saw some advertisements of it's okay to vote different from your husband or your partner in that respect. And looking at just most recent poll is the CNN exit polls that were published. If you look at that, you do see that 53% of women said they voted for Harris, but still 45% of women voted for Trump. So it wasn't as clear as we saw in a lot of the other, initial polls when you look at them. And one thing I also want to kind of call out is it's the type of women that come out. You look at for your suburban women, and some of them may have prioritized abortion as their number one issue. But it's interesting when you dive a little bit deeper into when you ask someone, do you think abortion should be always legal, mostly legal, mostly illegal, or always illegal? When you look at that, you actually saw that legal in most cases, it was split half and half. Half of the voters said they would vote for Trump, and half the voters said they would vote for Harris. So it goes to what I believe is the idea of states can protect your rights. Here in New York, we actually passed the amendment for Prop 1, which actually incorporates pregnancy status and pregnancy outcomes into the state constitution. So you do see that voters recognize that some issues can be solved by the states and some issues need to be solved by the federal government. So I think it's interesting when we look at that intersection of look at women first, but also then look at the general electorate of who do they want to vote for based on whether they think abortion should be always legal or mostly legal.
Interesting. Very interesting. As a woman, I don't love the fact that so many voted for Trump. But it is definitely very interesting to see and seeing where people's bottom lines are.
Yeah. And I would say that even though people are upset about the outcome, I saw in a lot of boards, I see trended on X, recount. I would say that when you look at the poll results and you think about it in an abstract sense, 61% of all likely voters said that we were on the wrong direction. 57% said they disapproved of the job that Joe Biden was doing. 27% said that the economy was their number one issue, and Trump had a 7-point advantage on that. If you look at the second most important issue was abortion. 15% of likely voters said that was their top issue, and Vice President Harris had a 15-point advantage on that. But then the third issue was immigration. So if immigration was, again, another 15%er, so basically tied with abortion when you look at likely voters, and Trump had a 9-point advantage there. So when you try to think about that is voters didn't choose one candidate or the other based on one issue. They actually considered their whole circumstances, and they said that their current view of the country is not in the direction they want. They look at the economy. They say this is not where I want to be. And one interesting thing about the election poll, the CNN exit polls, when you ask, for the folks who said that they feel that they're doing better today than 4 years ago, 82% said they were voting for Harris, or they voted for Harris in the exit poll. If you flip it the other way around, if you ask people, are you doing worse than you were 4 years ago? 81% voted for Trump. So this was one of those kind of outcomes where you think people are just looking for change. And they think that someone else at the steering wheel, whether it's familiar or not, is going to be the reason, or most likely reason that they voted that way.
Interesting. What I also thought was interesting is the decrease in amount of people that voted.
Yes.
I don't know the exact numbers, but Biden got like 82 million votes. I think Trump had like 78 million. I feel like that's correct.
It's in the ballpark, yeah.
In the ballpark, somewhere around there. And now we're looking at Trump having like 72, obviously votes still coming in, but 72 million and Harris 67 million. Any insight onto why the decrease in voting turnout?
I have some theories, and all theories are junk until they're backed up with evidence. But let's actually just go to the macro level. So let me take you back to 2008 and 2012. we had total voters that casted their a ballot in the general election was 129 million in 2008, 128 million in 2012. So essentially unchanged when you think about the Obama years. You look at 2016, which I like to consider the year of the third party, where you had many people on the general ballot. You had 135 million. So you brought some voters off the sidelines. You had some young first-time voters get involved. Bernie Sanders' campaign being one of the drivers of some of the young folks there. 2020 people are at home or they're comfortable voting in person. You had 157 million. And so we look at today, we're roughly at 139, 140 million votes. So I will say first thing, the barriers to voting have been increased. Before, it was much easier to get an absentee ballot, vote early. There was your attention was always in front of you because you had your cell phone out, you had your TV out. You couldn't get away because there's nowhere to go. So voting was on everyone's minds. I also think about some of what we saw in the primaries, these protest votes, especially when we think about Michigan. There were a lot of voters who voted for Biden who were generally unsatisfied with the situation in Gaza. There are voters who are worried about foreign policy that look at the before and after and say, we didn't have all these conflicts emerging. So we start to see some of these macro trends, and you start wondering, how come there wasn't more discussion about this possible outcome. Everyone focused, and I even said to myself, it's going to be close. And depending on what channel you tuned into, they focus on the rosy side of that perspective, rather than if you were not living in America, what would you think this group of people would most likely do in an objective sense?
Right. I mean, you would, if you're not living in America, you'd be like, of course they're not going to vote for Trump. That's cuckoo, that's crazy. He's a convicted felon. And then you're living in America and you feel dissatisfied with the way things are going. You have one option to change it. And Harris made it pretty clear that when she had the opportunity to say, what would you do differently? She didn't say anything. And I personally think that was a big mistake. But yeah, no, it's very interesting insight to see, and definitely saw some interesting interviews with voters who in Michigan, which has a huge Arab and Muslim population, that they were not going to vote for Biden no matter what. And I remember listening to one girl talk about it, and she was like, I honestly think if Trump wins, it might be better for the cause, because then people will be out protesting more, and there will not just be this kind of lax sense of just fine. No matter what, people are going to be out and protesting, and then that's going to bring more attention to what's happening in Gaza and the Middle East. And I think that definitely played a part in it a lot, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I also think about the people who said they didn't know who they're going to vote for. And it's very easy, whether you respond to a poll or not even respond to a poll, to kind of say, I'm not decided yet. It's a cheap answer. It doesn't cost you anything. But when you get to that ballot box and you start thinking about all of these things, am I better off today? Do I really think that these terrible things will happen? And in some ways, we saw in many ways, we saw fear mongering on both sides. And some of them seemed more far away, and some of them felt today problems. And I think that is some of the calculus that we see in the climate change issue. This idea of temporal discounts. I'm willing to not recycle today because that's so far away. We don't have to worry about it just right now. Versus my wallet has a hole in it. Who's going to fix that today? Because I need that fixed today, rather than worrying about a more abstract concept like democracy or reproductive rights.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've said this for a while, and I'll keep saying it. The Democrats are the worst at messaging, and I will scream it from the rooftops, because as a friend posted on ballot approvals in Missouri, everything that was approved is considered a liberal progressive idea. However, very much did not vote for Harris, has not voted for Biden, right? It comes down to the messaging, because when you come down to the actual ideals, most people can get behind them. But like you said, immigration or economy are forefront ideas that people feel like are affecting their day-to-day. And abortion and reproductive rights affects 50% of the country on their daily, right? And for how many are actually affected to that, it's different. It's very different. What I think is really interesting, what's getting a lot of coverage and press, is the Latino male vote.
Yes.
And that swung heavily um, away from Dems and really far to the right. What have you been seeing?
It's something that we saw, that was the part of the narrative was Trump has made a lot of inroads with young black voters and young Latino men especially. And we saw that also in the exit polls. So, just looking at Latinos as a monolith demographic, not breaking them out by gender, Harris did carry them at 52%. That's the greatest erosion for a Democrat in recent years. And that kind of already speaks to it. Then you add in the gender gap that we saw. You can quickly start seeing how it happened there. So one thing I will say is it appears that the Harris campaign's message did not reach those demographics. That one video of Barack Obama talking about talking points to do when you go door to door, they either were too little too late, or they, again, to your point, maybe just didn't land in the message. So it does show that it's pretty interesting that the the traditional norms of identity politics have gone away. And some people will be happy about that because now people are more talking about the issues rather than who do they look like, who they want to vote for. So that is going to be interesting. But I will say on the other side is looking at some of these characteristics, these traits of voters in some of our polls, we found that Donald Trump was actually argued to be, and their polls showed it, that people said he was a strong leader and he outperformed Harris on that concept. We actually did a AI driven experiment on some of those questions with these persuadable voters, and we partnered with an organization called Cloud Research. And what we found was the interpretation of that question, "strong leader," was read very differently. So there were some voters who said that, and they, in the transcripts of these interviews were pretty interesting, where that they would say that Donald Trump was a strong leader, that it would be sometimes positive and helpful in negotiations, but also unhelpful in other situations where he would actually be too stubborn to listen to advisors or too stubborn to actually to actually change his mind. So voters were going in with some of this this interpretation of their candidate. So recognizing that perception and the information you receive is key. We saw Elon Musk as someone who has a lot of power, especially in the media agencies, donate, giving away, not raffles. I forgot what the terminology. They were, yeah, chosen people based on their characteristics and how well of a spokesperson they could be. That gets people's attention when you're on the sidelines and you're like, I'm not really interested in politics, and you're, wait, there's $1 million raffle. It gets you more involved, and then you say, yeah, of course, I need this money. My livelihood is under attack. So we're going to learn more about the impacts of these large media personalities, the impact of these things. On the other side, it appears that Puerto Rico comment really didn't change people's minds. And when we go back to some of the polls we've asked over the last couple of months, we asked people, has Donald Trump said something that offended you? And our response choices was yes, recently, yes, but not recently, or no. And a lot of people have been offended by Donald Trump, but it's not news. It's the status quo. And in personal conversations, I hear people say, "I don't like the way he presents himself, but I like his policies." And when we go back to split ticket voters, voters don't just vote down the party line. They truly do think about these issues and who's going to serve them best. And they may say that I may not like this person up front for how they present themselves, but going back to the economy has not worked for me. And I will say that Americans also have short-term memories. All voters do. So whether they don't want to think about January 6th or they've forgotten about it altogether is something that's interesting. Whether they forgot about or don't want to think about these criminal cases, that goes into, again, how media and messaging has changed. So whether you talk to someone who watches Fox News or you watches MSNBC, they have very different perspectives. And I think that voters should divest from their single choice media, because if they feel surprised over whether the last 4 years or the upcoming next 4 years, it's important to tune into the other side and to hear the other argument, whether it makes you cringe or not. It's important to hear the other side. And I think echo chambers have only gotten worse, even though we become more aware about them. And the more we are able to have this dialogue, I think we'll be able to get away from this polarized electorate and start realizing that regardless of what party it is, there's a better solution for certain issues.
Totally agree. I always say the third voter is the social media algorithm. That's people think that there's some elite people that are just pulling the strings, and I was like, no, it's the social media algorithm. I was like, it's completely brainwashed anyone and everyone who's on social media. I mean, you go on, and even when I'm on TikTok, my entire feed is all pro-Harris content, all of it, because you spend less than 10 seconds on one video that advocates for that, and that is all you're going to get fed, right? So you're just creating these echo chambers, and it's so dangerous. And also just want to emphasize that people have to be able to have conversations with people they disagree with and be okay with disagreeing, right? And, sometimes that can be really hard because you feel like the person does not agree on fundamental rights and respect, right? And this is a very privileged thing to say, and I recognize it as a white woman. It's hard, though, because sometimes you have to get back down to the basics in order to be able to want to go further in building community, right? And having to recognize everyone's just trying to do the best for themselves and those that they care about. And you have to try to recognize that. And that's going to be the only way there's ever going to be any type of compromise and peace in this country. And anywhere, really. So just feeling reflective over this. And I've been saying for the past 2 years, you have to prepare yourself for another Trump presidency. And I was told repeatedly by my family that I'm stupid and it's never going to happen. And it's like, no, fear generally wins. As fucked up as it is, it does,
It's a powerful response.
It's a very powerful response. And as we can see, based on the results of the election, people do not want the status quo, and they're motivated by fear, and the fear that's tangible, right? And the economy and immigration, whether it is or is not, directly impacting someone, is a tangible fear. Whereas for minority of voters and a minority of people in this country is protections over uterus and childbearing age of tangible fear. So it's interesting. It's very interesting. And then also coming on to the points of demographic politics, right? And playing on Democrats always believing that they have Black voters and they have minority voters. And this shows that that's not the case anymore. And Democrats got complacent and they didn't provide anything to these groups of people. And it shows, right? And a lot of these minority groups were like, you can't just count on us. You need to speak to us. You need to work for our vote. This is not just something that gets handed. And that's what this election is showing.
Absolutely. You have to earn votes. You have to build coalitions, and coalitions break apart every 2 years because things change. Whether we think about the macro economy or the conflicts around the world, but people's lives change every 2 years. 2 years from now, people might be wanting to have more children or fewer children. 2 years from now, we might have another weird massive world pandemic. We might have another George Floyd. You think about all the possible social movements. People's minds can be changed quite easily, but they have to have a convincing reason to be changed.
Right. And I hope that these results will help motivate the Democratic Party to do some reckoning and influence the way in which they try to reach people and promote their policies. Because once again, when you just look at Missouri as one example, the policies are all considered liberal, progressive, populist policies. Yet the state continuously votes red, right? Why? We have to look at the why. So it's very interesting. Has any other data really stuck out to you from what you've seen?
I would say that just seeing, if you look at the Pennsylvania map, for example, and I think the New York Times has a great visualization on this. If you look at the change from 2020, every single county but one, maybe two, became more Trumpier compared to the previous election. So it's not isolated to one part or one state. It happened across the board. And I find that's interesting because we are a diverse nation, and every state has its own issues, and every group has their own priority and their own champion. So, just looking at that, that really kind of opened up my eyes to how quickly people like to boil down demographic groups into these buckets. When the intersectionalities is the things that we should be looking at. So you're going to see a lot of analysis looking at these intersections of Black and age and education, Hispanic age education. We're going to look at where you live, suburban versus urban, ex-urban women, and see their variation in votes. So that is one benefit of every year in May, we have the American Association for Public Opinion Research Conference. And this is when you bring every pollster, the smart people from the census, and we're all going to do a deep dive on this and really investigate this and publish a report to say, how well were the polls doing? I will want to just to pat ourselves on the back just a little bit. We were able to run some of our absolute error of our polls here, and just looking at the presidential across all the battleground states and a few others, Ohio, Montana, Nebraska, and Poland was very, very good this year. So our average absolute error was 3.49 percentage points.
That's great.
Which is basically the margin of error right on the dot.
Yeah.
So in that respect, you're going to hear a narrative, or you might see a narrative that the polls got it wrong. I would disagree. I think the polls did the right thing. They gave you a precise but imprecise measurement of where the election is. They gave you the temperature of the room, but they're not going to be able to tell you the exact temperature at the exact moment on election day. And we know that turnout changed. We know there were bomb threats. We know that
from Russia, by the way.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is crazy, which I think people kind of just slid over that one, but we'll continue, keep going.
No, and it goes to the point too, but bomb threats on election day is not much different from the SWAT attacks on schools. And that was another thing post-pandemic people talked about, is the safety of our schools, whether you think about vaccines or school shootings and threats. So these are all things that people are thinking about. And I feel that even though people are like, well, the poll said it was a tie, but Trump won decisively. Well, that's exactly what the margin of error was teaching us, or telling us, is, when you look at these two candidates side by side, there's not a landslide in front of you. So that is what activates campaigns. That is what activates civic groups. That is what activates everyday people to realize I can't just sit on the sidelines. I have to get involved and support whatever team I'm on. And some people supported Jill Stein. Some people supported Chase Oliver. Some people wrote in neither of these candidates. Regardless, people got involved, and 139 million people, spoke up and said, this is what we're thinking. And it wasn't a major difference from what we saw in the polls. So I will say that, preemptively, the polls didn't get it wrong, but how people, again, going back to our information or our media silos or echo chambers, I think based on what newspaper you read, you interpret it, oh, Harris has momentum, rather Harris is stalling. Or Trump is falling apart in the last 2 weeks of the election, when he was actually just maintaining the ground and it was just the status quo. And I think people's emotions were not in a way, were directed in a certain direction based on their hopes and optimism.
Totally. Everyone likes to stick their head in the sand. Makes life much easier and much nicer. And then the reality of things hits you. A question about Iowa, because there was that poll that came out like 2 days before the election, which I actually think probably made Democrats a bit complacent in thinking that it was going to be easy and it was going to be huge, and that people were secret Harris voters and not secret Trump voters. And the Iowa poll basically said that Harris was going to win Iowa. Of course, it was a margin of error by like 4 points, which was up by like 7 or 9, whatever, from where they had originally done the poll. What was the Iowa breakdown?
For the actual election day? Let's see if I can pull it up as we speak here. So looking at the wonderful New York Times map, so Iowa had a 13-point gap. Yeah, so and I remember the Seltzer poll. I believe Trump had a plus 14 or 18 advantage in the first poll in June before Biden dropped out. It went to, I believe, a plus 8 in September, and then I believe it was a plus 3 or 4 Harris just on, I think it was Saturday when we were making our last phone calls. I do not believe that poll weighted by education, which was one thing every single pollster said we have to do after 2016 because they understated this white non-college vote. So
Interesting.
it was interesting to see that, part of their methodological statement. And the other thing is, I believe this is a random digit dial survey. So they don't call off the voter file. They actually call anyone in the state and say, are you registered to vote? Are you going to vote? And so on and so forth. So I think the different methodology there, and going back to our previous conversation when we did speak, was we found that calling off the voter file was not just because it was more cost savings, more efficient, but you have a lot you reduce the error in the long run compared to RDD. So I think Ann Seltzer has been accurate, prolific over the years, and I wouldn't put this the stain on her record, but just recognize that when you use different methodologies and when you have these crazy events happen on both sides, you could always put your hand into the M&M jar and get all yellow M&Ms. That is a possibility. We report out to the 95% confidence interval saying, 1 out of 20 times, the actual result will be outside the margin of error, the margin we're talking about today. So I agree with you that a lot of coverage got that one poll when there wasn't a lot of conversation about, well, were there any other Iowa polls that could either complement the story or reject the story? And we think about polling is a scientific process. It's not we just put our thumb in the air and say the wind's going this way. We use the scientific method. And that's why I love polling averages, at least to be able to look at them if they're transparent, to really see if you keep on testing this hypothesis with new data collection, with different instruments, do you get the same result or not? And I don't feel that there was enough conversation about that. One poll is never the true story. It's just a measurement, a snapshot in time that doesn't let us see all the way into the horizon. It just gives us one frame of a much larger landscape picture.
Totally. Absolutely. I'm very proud of your polling. Congrats. It's very exciting. You should be it's great. It's really, really cool. I feel minorly proud of myself on I got 3 states wrong on what I anticipated. And I did secretly want to put Pennsylvania as red, but then if I did that, then Harris would have lost. And I was trying to be optimistic. So I had her winning Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But once again, if you look at it based on history and what happens, it is very, very common that the incumbent, and when you do another election, that it all swings the other way, right? Every single swing states that had gone blue previously went red. And I think that's a common pattern and something that people probably should have. Listen, threat to democracy is a really big fear and threat. It's not tangible like immigration or economy. Travis, thank you for breaking things down. Any last thoughts?
Well, I will say that this isn't the end of the analysis. One votes are still being counted as we speak. The best part about calling off the voter registration file is after the states upload their most recent data, we can go and compare the people who did vote and didn't vote. So we'll be able to understand differences in demographics that aren't just exit polls. Exit polls are great, but again, they're just a sample of the entire voter and electorate. Once we get the administrative data back, we'll have a lot more fruitful information to provide to everyone. So stay tuned. Whether you're happy and you're celebrating, congrats, you're participating in democracy. If you're sad and not feeling so great, I believe Vice President Harris just finished speaking, and she was saying that it's not time to give up; it's stay involved. And I encourage everybody, whether you are happy about the election or not, and not happy about it, is elections will happen in 2 years, then 4 years, and then 6 years, and 8 years. So they're not going away, and there's no reason to not be involved. If you're upset about anything, I always say you can't complain unless you vote. If you're not voting, you can't complain.
I love that. Yeah. And what she said was it's not the time to throw up your hands. It's the time to roll up your sleeves, which I thought was a great way of putting it. And just a friendly reminder, people just want the best for them that they care about, themselves and everyone that's important to them. Right. And no matter how someone lives their life, who they are, what they do, what they think, everyone deserves respect and the ability to do what they see best for themselves, as long as it does no harm to others.
Absolutely.
And that's what people should remind themselves with. And you have to be able to talk to your neighbor whether or not you like what they think or not, as long as they don't want the worst for you.
We're all Americans. We're all on the same team. We're humans. And whether we were, thousands of years ago on the Sahara, we just want to have a nice meal, a nice shelter, and to think that the future is going to be bright. And that's what people voted for.
Totally. Yeah. And so everyone, be nice to yourself and be nice to others. Travis, thank you so much for breaking it down. I'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.